Hello and welcome to the Bartholomew School English revision video. This is for English language paper 1. The sheet which gave you the QR code to take you here, you'll need that. And the focus of this is on section A, reading. The way to use this is that after I've explained how to do a question, you should try and have a go at that question using the paper we've given you. If you just listen to this video from start to finish without doing that, you're not going to get very much out of this and not going to do quite so well in the exam. So we strongly recommend that you pause the video and plan out, if not answer each question. That will give you a really good experience for the exam. So paper 1, the reading is there is one fiction text. There are 4 reading tasks, and then at the end there's one creative writing task from a choice of 2. So we're just going to focus on the reading part in this video. There is a separate video for the writing, the creative writing. So this is how the reading starts. Answer all questions. You're advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. Actually, unless you have extra time, you're going to spend 60 minutes on it. It says 45 minutes because they're factoring in 15 minutes of reading time. So reading plus answering, 1 hour. So what we would suggest you do now is press pause and read through the actual text. That will mean that everything from now on will make sense. If you don't read this, not a great deal of what I'm about to say is going to make sense to you. So press pause and read through this. So, having read it, we're going to go through each question. Question 1 is the one where they ask you to simply go through and give 4 things that you find out. They give you a little bulleted answer box like this. Your answers will be not one word. There'll be at least a phrase, if not a sentence. You don't need quotations. They just need to be 4 separate things. So things that could mess this up would be that you don't spot which lines they're asking you to look at. And also you really closely focus on what they want you to find out things about. So it won't necessarily say things we find out. It might be in this case about the jungle, it might be about a person, it might be about the weather. So just with your highlighter, make sure you highlight the focus of the question and do that one as quickly as you can. It's only worth 4 marks. It's a sort of warm-up question. So question 2 is language question. In the actual answer booklet, you don't have a separate piece of paper to do your answers. There's lines underneath and then pages of paper underneath the answer, and you simply write the answers in there. So the question will tell you which lines it comes from at the top there, but it also prints them out for you. So you do not need to go back to the text. It's already printed out as an answer. Highlighter out, it will ask you to focus on language, but that it will ask you to focus on a particular thing, like the setting or a character. Here it's the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And then the bullet points beneath, they will be what you will get in your exam. They're there every time. So words and phrases, so individual words whose connotations and implications you can talk about. Language features and techniques, so similes, metaphors, that kind of thing. Sentence forms, so short sentences, lists, long listing sentences, that kind of thing. You need to have a good range of technical features you know how to talk about. We have put in this booklet your English language technical knowledge organizer, so go through those and make sure you know lots of things from that. So what you'll do is you will read through it and you will highlight it. You will highlight individual words that have got useful connotations. You will look for imagery, so if you can find metaphors, similes, personification, you know you're going to write about those. They'll have chosen bits that they know are easier to write about. So if you find those, make sure they're a big part of your answer. Look at the verbs. Are there a lot of dynamic action verbs, or are they more gentle internal stative verbs? Adjectives are usually good things to write about. And then you can look for things like sounds, sentence length, syntax, so whether we get lists, long sentences, short sentences. Those sorts of things are good for emphasis. For the higher marks, start looking for links. So are you finding a pattern of verbs or a pattern of adjectives or a pattern of present participles? If you can talk about patterns, that's a nicer thing to do. So how do you start it? You will start it like this. In order to present the Tyrannosaurus Rex as, and then you give an opinion, so terrifying, enormous, huge, unearthly, whatever your opinion is, the writer uses, and then you say a technique, so a pattern of present participles, or dynamic verbs, or imagery. For example, you give your quotes and you analyse them. And then when you've finished on that technique, you give another technique. It's not an essay, it's going to be a relatively short answer, so you're giving them all the techniques that you can find, starting with your best one. So in terms of the basics for this answer, single word focus, that is the most important thing, that you focus on single words as much as you can. Don't give them long quotations. Single word focus means you're doing a language answer. And then you're talking about implies, suggests, has connotations of. You're never using the word shows. They're not interested in shows. Shows is not a language point. Implies and connotations, they're language points. And don't forget about your feelings. So does it create feelings of something or creates a tone of? So your brain runs out of ideas in the exam. Just say how it makes your heart feel, how emotionally you respond to that word choice. And finally, be technical. If you think it's a metaphor, say it's a metaphor. Say it's a verb. If you get things wrong, they'll most likely ignore those bits, but every time you get it right, they will reward you, and the mark scheme says that you are technical. So don't just call them lexical choices all the way through if you can help it. More advanced tips. So a more advanced answer will give layers. They'll say more than one thing about the same detail. As I said earlier, they'll look for links and for patterns. They'll be more technical and more specific, so they won't just say it's a lexical choice, they won't just say it's a verb, they'll say it's aggressive, dynamic verb. They'll focus on the writer's choices, so they'll say things like the writer's choice of this word or the writer's choice of this pattern, so they won't just say what happens, they'll talk about it as a choice that has effects. And they'll probably talk about sentence patterns and sounds as a way of emphasizing something. So how do the plosives emphasize it? How does that very short sentence emphasize something I've been talking about? In terms of time, it's worth 8 marks. You'll probably spend about 10 minutes on it. So question 3. Structure. So it will look very similar to this, your question. You now need to think about the whole of the source. The only bit that's probably going to be different in yours is this says the text is from the middle of a short story. Yours might say the beginning of a story, but the next bit will be the same. How is the writer structured the text interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes the focus as the source develops, any other structural features that interest you. That would be things like use of setting. It might be talking about why it's in the first person, third person, those other features. So you're going to aim for maybe 3 stages to the structure. So you could do this by just splitting it into 3 rough stages. So there's a beginning, a middle and an end. It might be sort of setting, characters' actions, say. So you could do that. Or you could see it more in terms of, a bit more accurately, you could see it in terms of 3 key moments that occur. It doesn't really matter which one you do. The second one's perhaps a little bit better. The key thing is you don't have to split it into 3 equal parts. That's not what they're asking you to do. They're just asking you, why is it in that order? And you're looking for parts that allow you to talk about the order it's in. So in terms of basics, they'll expect you to talk about focus. I would really try and use the word foreshadows, because something at the start is going to connect forward. Settings, usually quite an interesting thing to write about. Is there a pivotal moment you can talk about? And never say it makes you want to read on. That is never the right answer. That will lose you marks. It can make you curious about particular things, but it never just makes you want to read on. So here's how you might actually write it. The passage is structured in order to, what's the point of it? Introduce a character, create a climax, produce tension. What's the point of the structure? What's the opening focus? Give some quotes and then talk about the effect of that being the opening focus. What does the focus then shift to? So a new focus, or does it develop the same focus, or does it narrow down, zoom in, or broaden out? Quotes to prove what you're talking about, and then what's the effect of that shift? And then what does it shift to, narrow to at the end? Quotes, and what's the effect of that being the ending? So some more advanced ideas. A better answer will talk about how one focus prepares us or guides us to the next. So it will talk about why it has to be in that order to be really effective. It will talk about the choices the writer made. So the writer chose to put this first so that this will happen. They chose this to be the pivotal moment in the middle because it alters how you view the ending. And they'll be more technical. So there'll be a greater range of technical devices. If you go to the knowledge organizer, all of those things there are laid out for structure. You can go through all the different things you might want to talk about for that. They're not expecting all of them, but there'll be a greater range in a good answer. So here's how a perfectly good basic going to get you a pass answer will look. The passage is structured in order to create a sense of growing horror and tension about the T-Rex. The opening focuses on the setting, the jungle and the pterodactyls. The effect of this is to make the reader understand the dangerous situation and make them curious about what they might be hunting, foreshadowing the later violence. So it's really talking about the focus. There's a couple of quotes to prove they're not making it up. And it talks about the effect, and it gets the word setting and foreshadowing in so that they know they're going to give you some marks for technique. And then you shift on to what's the next focus and what's the effect of that. A more advanced answer. The passage is structured in order to create a sense of increasing panic of the men faced with such a creature. So it's a little bit more in depth and nuanced, the structure. The opening exposition establishes the unusual setting. Flying tents and pterodactyls introduces a sense of the characters being in an unearthly place. This initial focus unsettles the reader, making them feel it foreshadows unpredictable events with which the men will not be able to cope. So there are more technical terms in there. So we get exposition, which is a really easy thing to talk about, foreshadows, setting. But it also gives you a sense of how it's positioning you as a reader. How are you feeling and what are you expecting at that point? And then again, you switch on to the next one. In the exam, if you find that doing 3 sections is just not going to happen for you, it takes too long, just do a first half, second half. That's absolutely fine. So in terms of timing, it's worth 8 marks. Take about 10 minutes. This is not going to be an essay. Don't go over long on this answer. You've got a much more important question coming up next, so be strict with yourselves. So question 4, the evaluation. And here is the single most important thing about this question. It's worth 20 marks, which is everything you've just done so far. So you must give it time to do this properly. This is the one that will really determine your grade. So here's the question. So with your highlighter, focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source, line 31 to the end. So the first thing you do is work out which bit they want you to write about. Don't lose all your marks by writing about the wrong part. And then you get this statement. A student said, this part of the story where the men encounter the Tyrannosaurus Rex shows Eccles is right to panic. The monster is terrifying. So there'll be 1 or 2 key words or phrases, which is really what they're asking you in this question. So here it's right to panic and that the monster's terrifying. The next bit's very similar each year. So it'll ask you the extent to which you agree. And then it will ask you to write about your impressions of what happens, to evaluate how the writer does it, and to support your response with references. Right? What that basically means is write about your impressions, your personal impressions, be technical, and use quotations. If you do those 3 things, you're answering what they want you to do. So the first thing we do is draw a line that marks off the bit they want us to do, and put a squiggle through the bit we do not want to write about. And then we're going to, with our highlighter, quickly reread it. And we're going to highlight any details that suggest he's right to panic. The monster is terrifying. So there are key words. And we're going to be as technical as we can about that. The chances are you will broadly agree with their statement. They've never put one which is a strange statement. They tend to be fairly common sense responses to the text. In terms of being technical, all the things that you were looking at for language, you can also mention structure here as well, but every time you're technical, you will be rewarded for it. So, how would we begin this? So a sort of good, strong, basic answer. I agree that the men are right to panic and the creature is terrifying to the extent that the writer focuses upon the appearance, the description of the dinosaur's appearance. So it mentions the question, right to panic and terrifying. It says to the extent, which is the phrase they used. It says I agree, because it asks you whether you agree. And then it says why. Well, this person's saying they agree because of the description of the dinosaur's appearance. So now all they have to do is analyse the language used to describe the dinosaur, and they're getting the other marks. For example, we're told that the creature was crusted with slime which seemed to twitch. The choice of the adjective crusted creates a sense of, and they're doing an analysis that says this is why I agree, it's terrifying. So some basics, just like with language, single word focus. If you focus on single words, you're probably going to pass this exam. What do they imply, suggest, have connotations of? We never say what they show, that's of no interest to the examiner. The difference with a language question is you're going to link back to the key words more. This creates a sense of panic, or this another thing that makes it terrifying is, or this adjective makes it feel like they should panic because. So you'll keep coming back to those key words, but you'll also be technical. So a more advanced answer. I agree that the men are right to panic and the creature is terrifying to the extent that, so that's the same. The writer creates an impression of unstoppable power. So by talking about an impression, you're not only answering the question, you're doing something a bit more opinionated than just saying, well, it focuses on what it looks like. So it's the impression that's created. And then you start going through the way in which that impression is created. And then you come to another impression or another technique to create the same impression. You're working through the impressions that mean that's why you agree with the person. So what will a more advanced answer do? Well, just like in language, it will give layers. It will pick out the links and patterns. It'll be more technical. It'll focus on the impressions that writers' choices create. But it'll particularly do the next two things. The evaluation will go all the way through the answers. It won't just say I agree at the start and then never mention the keywords again. Right the way running through it, it will evaluate and respond to the keywords in the question. A lot of the marks of that 20 are for evaluation. So if you only do it at the start, you're limiting your marks. And a really good answer, as well as making good points about language, will interrogate the statement's words. So it will say, well, if you mean this by panic, or if panic means a sense of not being able to cope, or maybe a better word than panic might be hysteria, and it'll just really sort of squeeze and interrogate the words used to say whether they're the best words and exactly what you understand by those words, as well as looking at the language that makes you agree with them. So it's worth 20 marks. Unless you get extra time, you're going to spend about 25 minutes on that question. Okay, final tip. Don't overrun your time for the reading section. The writing section is worth just as many marks. So these questions can take ages if you're trying to be perfect about them. Be strict with yourself. The language section, the language paper is split equally between reading and writing. You've got just as many marks coming up on the writing section. So if you've only left half an hour to do it, you're not going to get as many marks on it. Very best of luck, guys. Go back and look at what your teachers have told you, and you'll be absolutely fine.